December 1st, 1943. I laughed the moment I heard the title echoing in my mind. I laughed at the P-51 Mustang. Even now, the memory cuts deeper than any fragment of metal I ever carry in my skin. The hangar lights were dim that morning, a pale yellow glow trembling against the frost that crept in from the French coastline. Someone shouted that an American patrol had been spotted, and when I ran outside with the others, I saw it, a single P-51 slicing across the cloud line. I remember smirking, I remember calling it a polished tractor, and I remember the men around me laughing with the same careless confidence. But by sunset the joke had already curdled inside my chest. What I thought was a clumsy machine was in fact the first omen of the sky that would one day fall over Berlin. My arrogance had a shape that day. Long fuselage, clean canopy, silver skin, and I was too blind to see the storm it carried. In the bar that night, the air was warm with cigarette smoke and cheap music from a battered radio. I repeated the joke about the tractor with wings, and the pilots around me slapped the table as if I had spoken some grand truth. We needed the laughter, or at least we thought we did. The ground crews had spent the entire week patching bullet holes in the returning Bf-109s, and even the senior officers walked with shoulders bent from exhaustion. So when I mocked the Mustang, it felt like proclaiming superiority, even if only for a heartbeat. Morning erased that illusion in a streak of contrails. We were scrambled just after dawn, engines coughing in the coal, the smell of oil thick in the air. Our climb toward the incoming bomber stream was routine at first, clouds glowing orange with the rising sun, distant thunder from the heavy formations. But something felt wrong. The horizon wasn't empty. Silver shapes moved ahead of the bombers, thin and fast, too fast for the sluggish American escorts we were used to. For a moment, I convinced myself they were lightnings. Then one banked sharply, the low winter sun catching the curve of its bubble canopy. A Mustang, not one, a whole flight. Our radio cracked as the formation leader barked an order to spread out, but the words dissolved into static. I pushed my throttle forward, the 109 responding with its familiar growl, yet the distance between us and the enemy never seemed to close. Instead, they closed on us, descending with a grace that made my palms prickle inside my gloves. The first pass tore through our right flank. I saw Tu-109 spiral down almost in unison, thin smoke trails twisting behind them like broken ribbons. No radio calls, no warnings, just silence where voices should have been. My friend Otto was flying in that group. I kept searching for his machine below, trying to find movement among the debris drifting toward the fields, but the sky was already turning into a tangle of arcs and flashes. One Mustang swept past me so close I felt my canopy shudder from its slipstream. Its nose, painted a soft yellow that almost looked gentle, flicked upward as it climbed, effortlessly, as if mocking our struggle to match its angle. Only then, watching its silhouette disappear into the glare, did the truth land with full weight. This was no tractor. I broke left, diving to escape the confusion, but contrails formed above me in layered white scars. The Mustangs were everywhere now, cutting paths through our formation with absolute confidence, as if they had been waiting for this moment. My engine rattled as I pushed it harder, trying to shake the cold creeping into my spine. When Ashley returned to base, the afternoon light was fading, and only half of our pilots came back with me. Otto wasn't among them. The laugh I had offered so freely the day before stuck like a stone in my throat. I knew something had changed in the war, not as a distant theory, not as a whispered rumor, but as a visceral truth I could feel every time I blinked and saw silver wings diving through the clouds. That was the day the sky stopped belonging to us. And it started with a joke I wish I had never told. January 20th, 1944. The cold that morning felt sharp enough to cut through leather and bone. Frost clung to every metal surface on the airfield, turning the parked 109s into silent statues waiting for orders none of us wanted to hear. I climbed into my cockpit with stiff fingers, breath fogging against the canopy glass as I pulled it closed. The winter air muffled every sound, yet something uneasy trembled inside it, a sense that the sky beyond the haze held a new threat. We took off into a gray world, climbing toward a reported bomber stream crossing the Rhineland. The clouds were thick and layered, a shifting ceiling of white that swallowed everything above us. I listened to the static-filled chatter on the radio, forcing my mind to stay sharp. But then I heard it, faint, rising, unfamiliar. Not the flat rumble of the Allison engines we had learned to read like punctuation marks in the sky. This was something tighter, faster, more precise, like a blade singing across steel. It grew louder. The hairs at the back of my neck lifted. I scanned the clouds and saw nothing at first, only rolling white shapes drifting past my wings. Then a shadow cut across the mist. My heart kicked hard as a silver shape burst from the cloud edge, climbing with impossible ease. The sound hit me a split second later. That sharp, refined roar. A Merlin, Packard-built or not, I knew instantly what it meant. The Americans had brought the uprated Mustangs. They didn't dive on us, not yet. Instead, they rose in clean arcs, their noses angled upward like they were drawing lines in the cold air, marking their advantage before striking. I felt my 109 straining beneath me as I tried to match the climb, the engine groaning in protest. It wasn't enough. They were already above us. A warning shout broke through the radio, but it came too late. The Mustangs dropped from the top of the cloud bank, some light catching their wings in silver flashes. Their engines whined with a chilling smoothness, tightening into a pitch that felt closer to a scream than a roar. Above me, behind me, beside me, they came from every direction at once, each one carrying that same terrible sound. I rolled hard right, the cold biting into my gloves as I gripped the stick. A Mustang streaked past my tail, its contrail slicing a white curve through the sky. The roar of its engine filled my cockpit, clearer than any voice on the radio. I had mocked that sound once, now it felt like a warning I had ignored for too long. Another pair of Mustangs angled downward ahead of me, their wings steady, their climb and dive rhythm flawless. They worked as if sharing a single mind, adjusting position with tiny, deliberate movements that spoke of endless training and perfect coordination. I could feel their confidence even from a distance. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew we couldn't match it. A 109 to my left tried to pull a steep turn, but the Mustangs had anticipated it. One broke formation, slid smoothly onto his tail, and fired a short burst. I watched sparks scatter across my comrades when before his aircraft dipped sharply and vanished into the cloud layer below. No explosion, no flame, just disappearance. The cold made it worse. It swallowed everything quickly. My radio continued to crackle with broken messages, fragments of panic woven with static. Their radios, though, I imagined them crisp and coordinated, guiding each movement with calm precision. We were fighting with frostbitten hands against a machine that seemed carved for the sky itself. I tried climbing again, desperate to break their angle, but the Merlin's pitch sharpened behind me. I didn't need to look. I felt the vibration in my spine. I pushed into a dive, letting the cold tear at my face as the canopy rattled. The Mustang didn't follow. It didn't need to. It had made its point. By the time we reached the airfield again, the day had turned pale and silent. I shut down my engine and sat for a moment, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. The roar of the Merlin still echoed inside my helmet, clean and merciless. That morning taught me something I should have known earlier. In war, underestimating a sound is underestimating survival itself. The Mustangs didn't just climb through the clouds. They climbed straight into our fear, and from that day on, the sky felt colder than the winter below. February 10, 1944, the morning haze over the Ruhr looked almost peaceful from a distance, a soft blanket of mist rising from the factories and rail yards we still believed were safe. For months we had told ourselves that American escorts would turn back somewhere west of the industrial belt, forced home by fuel limits and simple mathematics. Our instructors repeated the same assurances. They can't follow the bombers all the way. Those words had become a quiet prayer for us, a thin, fragile hope we clung to whenever we saw the horizon burn with another incoming raid. That illusion cracked the moment I saw the silver glint beneath the wings. We were climbing to intercept a dense formation, B-17s, that stretched across the sky like a slow-moving wall. Their contrails were layered and bright, forming white rivers that drifted eastward. As I rose through the cold air, the sun caught something unusual beneath the escort fighters above them. Shapes that didn't belong. I blinked once, then twice, refusing to believe what I saw. Extra tanks, long-range tanks, hanging neatly under the P-51s like pale, swollen teardrops. I felt a cold ripple move through my chest. They weren't turning back. They were coming with the bombers, all the way, every kilometer, straight toward us. I steadied my breathing, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a rare experimental group. But the truth settled quickly as more Mustangs emerged through the contrails, each one with the same extended reach strapped beneath its wings. They weren't sprinting into battle anymore. They were marching, confident, prepared. Endless, our formation broke slightly as some pilots whispered fragments of disbelief into their radios. I kept my eyes locked on the growing silver mass above the bombers. The Mustangs moved with a calm precision that made the air around me feel thinner. They had not rushed into the fight. They were waiting for us. One of the bombers opened fire early, its defensive guns flashing like tiny sparks against the clouds. We banked left, preparing for the first attack run on the formation. But before we even began our dive, the Mustangs were already sliding into position. They descended smoothly, almost lazily, forming a screen that wrapped itself around the bombers like armor made of sunlight. They weren't escorting the American bombers anymore, they were surrounding them. I pushed my 109 into a shallow dive, trying to find an opening near the edge of the formation. The air tasted metallic inside my mask, my lungs tight with cold and dread. Below me, the contrails formed new scars across the widening sky, thick and white, stretching from horizon to horizon. I realized that those trails didn't just mark altitude, they marked the death of every sanctuary we thought we had left. Our attack run lasted only moments. A wave of Mustangs cut across our path, their auxiliary tanks still attached, their range still full, their confidence untouched. They didn't fire immediately. They simply blocked us, forcing us into broken angles and desperate corrections. When they finally opened fire, the sky erupted into streaks of bright light and short, crisp bursts of .50 caliber thunder. A 109 ahead of me rolled violently and vanished into the haze, leaving behind a thin ribbon of smoke that twisted like a dying breath. Another tried to climb into the sun, but a Mustang with its long-range tank still intact rose effortlessly behind him, its shadow gliding across his wings before the tracer rounds found their mark. I felt the weight of the truth settle in my bones. The Ruhr wasn't a limit anymore. The old equations had been rewritten. Every kilometer we retreated, they would follow. Every line we drew on a map meant nothing. As I pulled low, skimming through the haze, I caught one final glimpse of the sky above, a web of contrails looping and crossing in luminous arcs. For the first time, I understood that we had no more places to run. The Mustangs were not only faster and higher, they were tireless. When I landed back at a temporary field east of the river, the ground crew didn't even look surprised to see fewer aircraft returning. They simply moved forward with tools in their hands, as if they had already accepted what we had only just begun to understand. Our sanctuary was gone, and the Mustangs, with their long-range tanks gleaming beneath their wings, had taken it from us without hesitation. February 23, 1944, the month had barely begun to thaw when the sky over Germany erupted into the most relentless week I had ever witnessed. We would later call it Big Week, but when it started, none of us grasped just how thoroughly it would shatter the world beneath our wings. I remember standing on the edge of a ruined dispersal area, my boots sinking into slush darkened with oil, staring at the rising columns of black smoke where our factories once stood. The air tasted of metal, ash, and something bitterly final. That morning, as we prepared to scramble again, I looked down at my gloves and realized they were trembling. Not from the cold, from what I had seen the day before. The American bombers had returned in waves, each escorted by more Mustangs than the last, their long-range tanks already discarded over the countryside like silver seeds. Every direction I looked, the sky had been carved into hard white lines contrails that formed a cage around the heart of our production centers. When the order came to take off, I climbed into my 109 with the uneasy sense that I was already late, already behind, already surrounded by the ghosts of the machines we had lost. The engine roared as I pushed forward, but even the familiar vibration felt fragile. The runway was scarred from the previous day's attack, littered with debris that crews had cleared only enough for us to take off. As my wheels left the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that the earth itself was trying to pull us back. Above the haze, the truth emerged in stark, merciless detail. The factories were burning. From thousands of meters up, I saw them great rectangles of fire and smoke where the Luftwaffe's lifeblood had once been forged. Assembly halls, engine plants, repair depots all spilling thick, black clouds into the winter sky. The fires glowed orange at their cores, flickering like wounded hearts trying to keep beating. I had flown over these towns countless times, but never had I seen them so exposed, so fragile, so thoroughly broken. Then came the sound, a chorus of engines, deep and constant, growing louder with every second. D-17s and B-24s filled a horizon like iron mountains drifting through the cold air, and woven between them were the Mustangs, sleek, bright, and terrifyingly calm. They weren't patrolling, they weren't searching. They were controlling the path ahead with the certainty of predators who knew their prey couldn't escape. We climbed to meet them, as we always did. But Big Week didn't give us battles, it gave us punishment. The moment we approached the bomber stream, the Mustangs appeared in layered formations, each group placed with a precision that made our maneuvering feel clumsy. They dropped toward us in coordinated arcs, 8 here, 6 there, for more descending like falling blades. Their wings glinted silver against the smoke columns, their engines singing that sharp Merlin pitch we had all learned to dread. I tried diving beneath the first group, but another flight of Mustangs swept in from below, forcing me back upward. Everywhere I turned, the enemy blocked the path like pieces on a board we no longer understood. For the first time in my life, I felt like a passenger inside my own cockpit, reacting instead of choosing. A 109 on my right attempted a high-speed pass on a bomber, but 3 Mustangs peeled from formation and intercepted him in a synchronized turn so perfect it almost looked rehearsed. I watched their guns flash in short, controlled bursts. My comrade's aircraft shuddered, dipped, and went into a slow, sickening spiral toward the burning landscape below. The sky above the factories became a battlefield of white scars and black plumes. I could see pieces of machinery scattered across the countryside, metal still glowing red where workshops had collapsed. Fields were pocked with craters, roads were blocked by fallen roofs and shattered walls. The industrial backbone that had carried us through the early war had been cracked open in a matter of days. And over all of it always were the Mustangs, not chasing, not hunting, guarding. They were the locked door between us and the bombers. The barrier we could no longer break. The key, I realized with a bitter sting, was in American hands, and we were pounding on the wrong side of it with fading strength. What actually landed, the smoke from the factories drifted even across the airfield, blurring the horizon until sky and destruction became the same dull color. My mechanic looked at my aircraft, then at me, and for the first time he didn't ask how many we had lost. He already knew. Big Week hadn't just wounded our industry. It had exposed the truth that we refused to say out loud. The Mustang wasn't simply defeating us in the air. It was erasing the ground beneath our war-one burning factory at time. March 6, 1944, the first day they reached Berlin, should have begun like any other interception. But the sky over the capital felt heavier, as if it already sensed what was coming. Dawn spread pale light across the wrecked streets, brushing the ruined rooftops with a fragile softness that clashed painfully with the distant hum rising from the west. By the time I reached the airfield, crews were already pointing upward, whispering that the bombers were coming sooner, faster, and in greater number than expected. My breath frosted inside my mask as I climbed into the 109. The cold cut through the cockpit seals and bit at my fingers while I adjusted my harness. I tried to steady myself, but the truth was pulsing beneath my ribs. This was the day I had been dreading since France, the day the Mustangs would follow us home. Takeoff was swift and brutal, the runway was slick from morning ice, and the aircraft jolted beneath me as it fought for grip. Once airborne, I climbed with the others into a sky that seemed both too wide and too close. Berlin lay below us like a wounded giant, its scars from earlier raids still fresh. I carried a knot of dread in my chest so tight I could barely breathe. Then the contrails appeared, thin at first, barely visible threads against the pale blue, but as we climbed, they thickened into long, sweeping strokes that stretched from horizon to horizon. At the center of that enormous up were the bombers, dozens at a time, layered in depth, their formation so vast it seemed endless. And around them, circling like silver guardians, were the Mustangs. I pushed high and fast, trying to gain altitude before the inevitable clash. The air thinned as frost crept across the edges of my canopy. My engine strained, but I managed to pull ahead enough to position myself for a high-speed dive. The plan was simple: strike the bombers before the escorts reacted. But plans rarely survived the sky. A shadow flicked across my left wing. I banked sharply, cold sweat prickling under my collar. A P-51 slid into view behind me, smooth, deliberate, patient. Its wings were trimmed with patterns of soft yellow, its nose gleaming beneath the rising sun. I dove, hoping to shake him, but he followed instantly, matching every movement like an echo I couldn't escape. The pressure of the dive rattled my teeth. My engine screamed. The ground rushed upward. I pulled hard, feeling a crushing weight press into my chest as the 109 strained to stabilize. For a split second, I believed I had outmaneuvered him. Then I heard it, that clean, sharp growl of the Merlin, close, right behind me. My whole body tensed. A burst of bullets tore past my canopy, clean arcs of light flashing only centimeters from my left wing. My nerves jolted as I forced the 109 into a shallow climbing turn. Another burst followed, closer this time, the sound vibrating through the frame of my aircraft. When it actually broke into a cloud bank, the air inside the cockpit felt suffocating. I pulled out low, skimming just above rooftops that blurred beneath me. Smoke pillars rose across the city, curling into the morning like blackthorns. The Mustang didn't follow me into the clouds not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to. He had made his point. I limped the 109 back toward a secondary field on the outskirts. My landing was rough, the wheels scraping mud that sucked at the fuselage as I rolled to a stop. I opened the canopy and gasped, the cold air slapping my face. That day marked a shift none of us could deny anymore. If the enemy had reached Berlin with fighters, then distance meant nothing, borders meant nothing, and the sky belonged to them. The sound of the Merlin echoed in my teeth long after the engine died. April 2, 1944. The months had begun to blur into a long corridor of loss, but April brought something new, something crueler than bombs or bullets. They sent woes to us, not recruits, not trainees, woes, blue-eye, hollow-cheeked, wearing uniforms too large for their shoulders. The Luftwaffe had burned through its pilots like fuel, and now the shortages had become impossible to hide. I still remember the way one of them held his checklist. His hands shook so badly the paper fluttered in the breeze. The aircraft assigned to him was a G6 with patched wings and worn tires. He had flown it only once during training, and yet the officers ordered him into the air with the same authority someone might use to order a meal. I watched him from a few meters away as he climbed into the cockpit. He moved as if in a dream, the canopy closing over him like a glass coffin. I felt a deep, nauseating shame twist inside me. The regime demanded loyalty, sacrifice, obedience, but what it gave back was indifference. It burned through its youth without hesitation, and every day I stayed silent. I felt complicit. We were scrambled before I could speak to him. The field erupted with the whine of engines, mud spraying beneath the spinning wheels. I lifted off, catching a glimpse of the Bose 109 wobbling slightly as it gained speed. My throat tightened. Above us, the Mustangs were already forming a net. They swept in with the same frightening coordination I had seen over the rower, but now something felt different. They hesitated when approaching the younger pilots, not in mercy, but in recognition. Perhaps they saw the trembling turns, the erratic climbs, the way our formations no longer held like they once did. We weren't a fighting force anymore. We were a frayed rope stretched over a cliff. I tried to stay close to the boy, but the sky tore us apart. A Mustang dove between us, its polished surface reflecting a cold glare. I banked, trying to draw it away, but the pilot ignored me and followed the weaker target. I shouted into the radio broken words, desperate commands, but the static swallowed everything. The boy panicked. I saw it in the way his aircraft jolted downward, the nose dipping too far, the wings fluttering in a dangerous wobble. He tried to correct, but the Mustang rose behind him like a silent executioner. A short burst of fire snapped across the sky. His plane folded, no explosion, no flame. Just a sudden, heartbreaking collapse as the 109 dropped toward the earth in a helpless spiral. The Mustang didn't pursue me afterward. It simply leveled out, circled once, and returned to formation. As if acknowledging a grim duty completed, we landed in silence that afternoon. The officers called it a strategic loss, but I knew what it really was, a sacrifice. A needless, cruel sacrifice forced on children who had no chance. As I removed my helmet, I felt a weight inside my chest that no enemy could have inflicted. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even grief. It was disgust at myself, at the regime, at the war that had twisted us into shadows of human beings. The Mustangs weren't the only thing we were losing to. We were losing to our own leaders. May 18, 1944, the day I came closest to a Mustang, I understood something I had never grasped before. The enemy pilot wasn't just a rival in the sky. He was a person, flesh and bone, carrying his own burdens. And seeing him shook me more than any attack ever had. It happened during a late afternoon patrol over scattered cloud layers. The sun hung low, casting a golden sheen across the upper atmosphere. The 109 hummed beneath me, steady but tired, the engine vibrating with a rhythm I knew too well. Below, the land stretched in muted colors, fields and forests blurred by the lingering haze of distant fires. Then I spotted him, a P-51D, climbing gently from my 3 o'clock, its canopy catching the sunlight like a lens. I banked left, expecting him to break away or dive. He didn't. Instead, he continued rising until our flight paths met. We passed so close that I could see the shape of his helmet, The calm posture of his shoulders, a faint reflection of the setting sun on his goggles. For a heartbeat, our worlds aligned, two young men trapped in a sky neither of us controlled. He looked composed, almost solemn. I fired. The instant reflex kicked in, my thumb pressing the trigger with a burst of fear more than aggression. The tracers arced past him, bright streaks swallowed by the wind. I missed cleanly. My hands tensed with frustration, adrenaline burning through my veins. He didn't miss. His burst came a second later. Short, precise, disciplined. The bullets snapped past my canopy, their sound sharp enough to pierce the marrow in my bones. I felt one hit the fuselage behind me, a jolt, a muffled crack that made the entire aircraft shiver. My heart slammed against my ribs. I dove, desperate to break his angle, the G-forces clawing at my vision. The cloud swallowed me for a moment, offering a thin, fleeting shield. I pulled out low, breath shaking, sweat gathering beneath my mask. The world narrowed into the sound of my straining engine. When it actually leveled out, I realized he wasn't following. He had let me go. Why? Mercy, indifference, or simply following orders that didn't require a kill. I didn't know, but I knew how that moment felt. Like a mirror held up to everything I had ignored. The Mustang, the machine I once mocked, was flown by someone whose calm steadiness cut deeper than any weapon. I returned to base trembling, the sound of his gun still echoing in the hollows of my ears. The sky had always been dangerous, but that day it became something else, a place where I could no longer hide behind arrogance or excuses. The war had changed, the enemy had changed, and somewhere inside, so had I. That close past showed me a truth I hadn't wanted to face. We were not fighting faceless machines. We were fighting men who were better trained, better equipped, and worst of all, no longer confined by distance. The Mustang wasn't just an airplane anymore. It was a reminder that the sky itself had turned against us. June 1, 1944. The debriefing room had once been a place of nose-chalk tapping, boots thudding, voices rising in confident plans that carried the illusion of control. By June, that nose was gone. Silence had replaced it, spreading like a fog through the rows of wooden chairs and over the scratched blackboard where names should have been written in chalk. Instead, Officer Kurdmer drew symbols, arrows, circles, trajectories as if a diagram could replace the men who no longer sat among us. I took my seat, still wearing the grime of the sortie. Sweat dried on my collar as I stared at the board, waiting for Kurdmer to begin. He didn't look at us when he spoke. He kept his eyes fixed on the chalk, dragging each line across the surface with slow, deliberate strokes. The scraping sound filled the room like a tired breath. When he asked for mission reports, no one answered. The silence felt heavy enough to bend the floorboards. I knew why we all did. We were supposed to say engine failure, or structural damage, or forced landing. Anything but the truth. Anything but shot down by Mustangs again. Finally, someone rose. Vogel. His face was gray with exhaustion, his hair plastered to his forehead from the helmet he hadn't bothered to remove properly. He described losing his wingman somewhere over the elbow. He didn't say shot down. He didn't say killed. He used the phrase every one of us had been trained to use. Lost contact. Kurdmer wrote a small mark on the board. A single white line. A tally for a man who had been laughing with us only yesterday. My stomach tightened. That line looked like a headstone lying flat. Then my name was called. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room even though most of the pilots stared at the floor. I recounted what I had seen. The contrails approaching from above. The escort weaving its pattern. The formations tightening whenever a German aircraft came within range. I explained how the Mustangs had blocked our climb, how they anticipated each turn with unsettling ease. But when I reached the part where another pilot vanished in front of me, simply gone, swallowed by a sudden burst of fire, I hesitated. I didn't know how to describe the feeling, so I said nothing. Kurdmer didn't press me. He simply nodded and made another mark on the board. 2 lines now, then 3, then 4, names we would never speak again. The room seemed to shrink with each tally, the air growing stale and suffocating. We were not debriefing anymore. We were mourning without permission. The officers called these tactical retreats, temporary losses, operational delays, but we knew the truth. Every mark on that board was another life taken by the same silver-winged shadow. When the session ended, no one moved. We lingered, staring at the chalk as if the dead might reappear if we just waited long enough. My tongue felt thick and dry, my throat hollow. The word defeat hovered in my mind, heavy and undeniable, but out loud. No one said it. We left the room one by one, boots echoing softly down the corridor. As I stepped into the fading afternoon light, I realized the silence we carried was not just grief. It was the unspoken understanding that the sky we once commanded had turned into a place where our voices no longer matter. And tomorrow, more chalk lines would wait for us. June 22, 1944. By late June, I had learned to read the sky the way a sailor reads waves. Contrails became my compass, my warning, my omen. Their patterns were as revealing as any formation chart. Thin trails meant climbing fighters. Dense trails meant heavy dives, and tangled knots meant chaos we were too late to stop. That morning, the horizon shimmered with a strange calm. Wisps of white drifted lazily in the high air, illuminated by the early sun. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed them for contrails, sharp and aligned, cutting across the sky with a deliberate purpose. Not drifting, not dissolving, moving. I tightened my grip on the controls. For trails meant a flight of Mustangs. As we climbed toward the bomber route, the trails grew clearer. Their density told me everything. They were diving now. Somewhere above us, a group of Mustangs had spotted something us, or maybe another flight-breaking formation. I tried to judge their angle, but the trails bent in a way that made no sense. They curved smoothly into positions where no aircraft should have reached so quickly. It was like watching the sky redraw itself. I felt a cold jolt in my chest. I remembered something an older pilot had once muttered: "The Americans fight like the sky belongs to them." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. But now, seeing the contrails twisting into impossible arcs, I understood exactly what he meant. Our formation spread out, each pilot adjusting altitude and speed. The radio crackled with broken fragments, commands swallowed by static. I banked left, trying to angle for a climb that might put me above the oncoming Mustangs, but every adjustment felt too slow. Their trails shifted again for thick streaks suddenly cutting downward. They were diving directly toward us. The first Mustang broke through the thin clouds, sunlight flashing across its wings. Another appeared to my right, then to more above. It was like they had emerged from the air itself, unfolding from the sky's seams. I rolled hard, feeling the airframe shudder as I tried to slip beneath them. A ring of contrails formed above me, closed, tight, intentional. I had seen it once before. A coordinated descending maneuver. They were boxing us in. Bullets streaked past my canopy in thin, glowing lines. I dropped low, pushing my engine to its limit, the altitude warning needle hovering dangerously near the red. A Mustang slipped through my peripheral vision, its silver fuselage gleaming like polished ice. It fired a short burst. I jerked my aircraft sharply, hearing the wind scream around the frame. The sky had turned hostile. Not because of the guns, not even because of the Mustangs, but because every inch of it seemed designed to trap me. When I actually escaped into a bank of low clouds, my breaths came shallow and quick. I skimmed the lower air, praying the Americans wouldn't follow. For minutes, I heard nothing but the hum of my own engine. When I broke free of the clouds, the contrails above me formed a perfect crosshatch pattern, lines over lines, paths over paths, like a map drawn by hand that knew every secret of the sky. And as I flew back to base, one truth burned inside me with painful clarity. We weren't fighting pilots anymore. We were fighting the very architecture of the heavens, shaped, twisted, and commanded by the Mustang. July 14, 1944. By midsummer, the war had shrunk our world into a handful of battered airfields. Each week brought a new temporary relocation, a phrase the officers used as though we were taking leisurely vacations from the front. In reality, we were fugitives chased by engines we could hear long before we saw their wings. The morning we moved to the field near Magdeburg, the air smelled of damp soil and burned rubber. The ground crews were already unloading crates of ammunition beneath the makeshift tents, their faces hollow from sleepless nights. The field itself was little more than a ribbon of packed dirt, bordered by tall grass and craters from recent attacks. Our 109s lined up along the edge, their fuselages streaked with mud and oil, looking less like war machines and more like relics struggling to stay alive. I stepped out of the truck and scanned the horizon. A thin plume of smoke rose in the distance, too thin for a burning building, too steady for a campfire. It was the kind of smoke that came from airstrikes hours old, drifting across fields that once grew wheat. We weren't even airborne yet when the first warning came. A faint hum, a vibration in the air, then the unmistakable rising pitch of Merlin engines. Crewmen froze, mechanics dropped tools. A pilot beside me muttered a quiet prayer. They were already here. Sirens wailed across the field as we scrambled toward our aircraft. I climbed into my cockpit so fast I scraped my knee against the frame. The canopy slammed shut, sealing in the sound of my rapid breathing. My hands shook as I primed the engine. It coughed once, twice, then roared to life, but the Mustangs were faster. They descended in pairs, gliding over the treetops with chilling ease. Their silver wings reflected the sun in sharp flashes, and for a moment they looked like blades slicing through the air. They weren't hunting bombers today, they were hunting us. I pushed the throttle forward, the 109 jolting violently across the uneven ground. Dirt flew against my canopy, so I prayed the wheels would lift in time. A burst of gunfire cracked behind me, tearing through the grass. The plane vibrated under the impact of near misses. My wheels left the ground just as a Mustang swept past my right side, close enough for me to see the checkerboard pattern on its nose. It banked upward, looping smoothly into position for another pass. I had barely gained altitude when two more Mustangs dove directly toward the field, their guns flashing. The ground erupted in sprays of dirt and splintered wood. A fuel truck burst into flames, black smoke billowed upward, staining the sky. I climbed hard, lungs burning, heart pounding so violently I felt it in my fingertips. Below, the field shrank into chaos fires, fleeing mechanics, crippled aircraft twisting into wreckage. The Mustangs turned toward me next, but the wind pushed behind my tail, carrying me eastward just fast enough to slip out of their immediate reach. I ducked into a bank of clouds, the world going dim and gray around me. My breath fogged the inside of my mask. For a full minute, I heard nothing. When actually emerged into clear air, the field behind me was already fading beneath a veil of smoke. Another home lost, another strip of earth burned away. Another piece of our war erased. It struck me then not as a thought, but as a physical ache that the Mustangs weren't just dominating the sky. They were shrinking the ground beneath our feet. Every day, every hour, the world we fought for grew smaller. And the sky, always the sky, belonged to them. August 3, 1944. The radio had always been a fragile lifeline for us, a thin thread of voices stretching through the cold sky. But by August, even that thread was fraying. Static hissed through the headset before every transmission, swallowing entire words and leaving us with half commands and blind guesses. My radio was especially temperamental, one moment whispering broken syllables, the next going silent altogether. It felt like flying with cotton stuffed in my ears while the world burned around me. That morning, the air felt heavy with moisture, a low gray mist clinging to the treetops as we prepared to intercept a bomber stream heading toward central Germany. I tapped the side of the radio panel, hoping to coax it into cooperation. The only answer was a weak crackle, like someone exhaling through sand. Another pilot joked that kicking it sometimes helped, but the truth was nothing could bring life back into equipment that had been patched together too many times with too few parts. We took off into a sky already scarred with distant contrails. As I climbed, the radio sputtered again, catching fragments of the squadron leader's voice. Altitude, left, Mustangs approach, then silence. The worst kind. I scanned the horizon, trying to stitch together the meaning behind the broken words. My breath sounded too loud inside the mask. The engine hum felt strangely distant. With a functioning radio, I would have known where the others were forming up, when to dive, when to brake. Instead, I was a lone thread unraveling in the wind. Then I heard it, the crisp, coordinated chatter of American radios bleeding faintly through the static, clear, sharp, steady. They spoke in calm tones, giving altitude updates, headings, and warnings with a confidence that felt almost cruel. Their voices overlapped in a perfect rhythm, while mine was trapped behind a dead panel and a failing system. The contrast struck me harder than any burst of gunfire ever had. A flash of silver cut across the clouds above me, a Mustang. Two more followed, descending in a beautiful, terrifying symmetry. I rolled into a defensive turn, but without radio guidance I didn't know where my own squadron was or if they were even still alive. The Mustangs spread out like a net tightening around me. I dove sharply, the airframe rattling as I pushed it to the limit. My radio hissed violently for a second. Brake, brake, then died again. Too late. A burst of tracers stitched the air behind me. I felt the vibration of near hits tremble through my seat. I skimmed low over the treetops, heart pounding, the world reduced to speed and instinct. The Mustangs hesitated before following, perhaps wary of anti-aircraft fire near the forest line. I used that small mercy to slip away, zigzagging through pockets of cloud until their shadows faded behind me. When I landed back at the field, the silence hit me harder than the roar of the engine. No one said a word as I climbed out, because no one had to. Every pilot understood what had nearly killed me that day wasn't the Mustang's guns. It was the silence in my ears. Their radios sang, ours coughed and died. And in a sky ruled by coordination, that difference was fatal. August 27, 1944. The late summer heat pressed heavily on the canopy as I climbed through the haze, my eyes stinging with sweat. We had been scrambled to intercept to another formation heading eastward, and for once, everything seemed routine. The engine responded smoothly, the climb felt clean, and the sun lit a straight path toward the high-altitude battle forming above. But when I tried to push into a vertical climb, everything changed. I flipped the MW50 switch, waiting for the surge of power that usually hit like a kick to the ribs. Instead, I felt only a slight tremor, then a muted cough from the engine. The boost lagged, delayed by a heartbeat that stretched into panic. By the time it kicked in, I had already lost precious altitude and angle. The sky above me opened like a blade. A P-51 dropped from the sun, cutting in front of my nose with a silver flash. I jerked the stick back, but my climb was too slow. The Mustang rose effortlessly above me, its shadow sweeping across my canopy. In that instant I felt exposed, small, and horribly slow. I tried again, pull up, gain the vertical, force the fight upward where the 109 could sometimes claw an advantage. But the aircraft shuddered, the nose bucked, the engine groaned with a vibration that felt like a warning. Then the vibration turned violent. A metallic rattle shook through the wings as if the airframe itself were protesting my commands. I saw the horizon tilt sharply, the blue sky slicing past my left window like a knife. Sweat pooled on my palms as I fought to keep the aircraft steady. Above me, the Mustang looped with smooth, effortless grace. It didn't dive immediately. It watched me position itself, then rolled into place behind my tail with a calm precision that made my skin go cold. The first burst missed, the second didn't. Tracers zipped past my right wing, bright streaks of light that burned into my vision. I threw the aircraft into a desperate dive, the G-forces crushing my chest as the world blurred into streaks of green and gray. The Mustang followed, matching every movement. The engine screamed, my vision pulsed, the edges of the world dimmed. I pulled out at the last second, the 109 skimming low across a field, wheels nearly brushing the tops of the crops. The Mustang didn't follow into the dive, either cautious or simply satisfied with the damage done. I climbed weakly, each motion sending new tremors through the airframe. Behind me, a column of smoke rose from the outskirts of the capital. Another bombing raid, another day of losses. When I limped back toward base, the engine sputtering, I realized the truth I had resisted for too long. Even with boosts, even with perfect conditions, even with every advantage we once believed we owned, the 109 could no longer reach the heights where the Mustang ruled effortlessly. The sky had become a staircase, and they were always one step higher. September 9, 1944. By early September, the greatest humiliation wasn't the dogfights. It wasn't the Mustangs on our tails, or the factories burning, or the fields shrinking beneath us. It was the sight of entire bomber formations returning home intact. Months earlier, we had measured our success by the number of crippled aircraft limping westward, engines smoking, wings shredded. Even when we lost half our squadron, we took grim satisfaction in watching at least a handful of damaged bombers peel away from formation. It meant we had done something. It meant our presence still mattered. But now they returned as they had arrived, in tight, perfect boxes, gliding through the sky with silver confidence. Their escorts spread wide around them like a protective shell. Not one engine trailing smoke, not one wing dipped with damage. The Mustangs had changed everything. We were scrambled late in the morning, sunlight glaring off the canopy as we climbed. The air was crisp, the kind that made the world look deceptively calm. But as we approached the bomber stream, I saw it, the overwhelming silver mass, layered with shining contrails that wrapped around the formation like armor. We attempted a coordinated climb. The Mustangs intercepted before we reached firing range. They didn't attack immediately. They positioned themselves above, below, ahead, behind, each one covering an angle we could no longer hope to exploit. Their movements were precise, confident, almost mechanical in their exactness. 109 dove for the bombers anyway, desperate or foolish. For Mustangs detached like arrows and cut him off in seconds. A quick burst, a bloom of smoke, then nothing. The bombers didn't even waver. I circled wide, heart pounding, trying to find a gap, anything. But the escorts were everywhere. Their contrails formed an elegant cage, tightening every time we tried to maneuver around it. Their discipline was brutal in its efficiency. I made one final attempt, diving toward the lower edge of the formation. A Mustang appeared instantly, sliding into my path with unnerving control. Its pilot didn't fire. He simply stared at me through the canopy, calm, resolute before banking just enough to force me away. It wasn't a battle. It was a denial, a deliberate, crushing denial of our ability to touch the bombers at all. By the time fuel forced us to turn back, not a single American bomber had been touched. They continued eastward or westward, whichever direction the mission dictated, with the same measured pace, engines rumbling like a single heartbeat. As I flew home, watching the silver wall recede into the distance, an unbearable truth lodged itself in my chest. The Mustangs weren't just killing us. They were erasing the last purpose we had left. And for the first time, I realized the war wasn't slipping away. It had already slipped. September 21, 1944. The morning fog clung low over the airfield as I found my mechanic crouched beside the 109, hands buried in the open engine bay. His face was gray with exhaustion, smudged with streaks of oil. For a moment I thought he was simply concentrating. Then I saw his shoulders shaking. No bombs fell that night. No Mustangs roared overhead yet. He wept as if the sky were collapsing on us. He tried to hide the empty crate beside him. No spark plugs, no proper filters, no replacement hoses. The supply convoys had stopped coming weeks earlier, swallowed by the chaos spreading across the collapsing front. He muttered something about humidity, about faulty shipments, about bad luck. But I saw the truth in the way he pressed his greasy palms against his face. He blamed himself for problems no man could fix. I felt something inside me twist. The regime demanded miracles from these men, while giving them nothing but broken parts and threats. They punished failure as if physics were a suggestion. My mechanic's tears weren't about the aircraft. They were about the impossible expectations crushing him, crushing all of us. That day I understood. The war was not only unwinnable, it was unsustainable. October 2, 1944. Orders arrived before dawn, delivered by an officer whose boots were still wet from the night's rain. The instruction was blunt. Attack the incoming formation without hesitation. No mention of fuel limits, no consideration of numbers. Just blind demand, stamped with authority that no longer carried meaning. I taxied onto the muddy strip with a knot tightening in my chest. Berlin's ruins stretched beneath a bruised sky as we climbed. The bomber stream appeared quickly and the Mustangs were already above us, their silver silhouettes poised like hawks. Every instinct told me to wait for a clearer angle, to protect my wingman, to think. But the order echoed in my mind, poisonous and rigid. I hesitated for half a heartbeat. That hesitation saved my life. Two of my comrades dove in obediently, racing toward the bombers. The Mustangs descended instantly, carving through the sky with cruel precision. I watched their aircraft burst into smoke before they even fired a shot. The officer would later call their loss unavoidable. I called it deliberate negligence. As I spiraled away, the weight of that half-second settled into my bones. I had disobeyed, and yet I remained alive while braver men did not. That contradiction still haunts me. October 19, 1944. The Mustang struck from beneath the cloud base, a sudden flash of silver in the dim afternoon light. I barely had time to react before the first burst tore across the air behind me. Instinct pulled me into a dive, the wind roaring as the altimeter spun downward. There was no room for error, no chance to climb, no time to think. Ejecting was impossible. The 109's design made it a coffin in moments like these. So I forced the landing, leveling out at the last second and skidding across a soaked field. Mud erupted around me as the plane's belly slammed into the ground, the jolt ripping through my spine and stealing the breath from my lungs. When the aircraft halted, I tore off the harness and dropped into the sucking earth. The only sounds were distant explosions and the faint moan of wind through broken reeds. Above me, the sky pulsed with contrails lawn, white scars drawn by machines that now ruled every layer of air. I stood there shivering, soaked in mud, watching the Mustang vanish into the clouds. The realization hit me with numbing clarity. It wasn't luck that spared me. It was irrelevance. The sky no longer needed me. The war had already moved on. November 3, 1944. The shelter beneath the shattered warehouse smelled of damp concrete and fear. I sat alone, uniform draped over my knees, the insignia dull under the flickering lantern light. My hands trembled as I peeled away the patches one by one, first the eagle, then the rank tabs, then the last threads tying me to a regime I could no longer defend. Outside, distant shelling echoed like slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the city. For years I had justified my obedience with duty, survival, necessity. But now, with the weight of my failures pressing into my chest. I saw the truth without distortion. I had laughed at the Mustang because it was easy. I had obeyed orders because it was safer. I had flown for a cause that had long since rotted from within. The memories of the boys sent to die in worn-out machines filled my mind. The factories burning, the airfields shrinking, the silver wings carving through our arrogance. Every moment pointed to the same conclusion that fear had steered my life more than any compass ever could. In that dim shelter, surrounded by rubble and smoke, I made my confession not to an officer or a report, but to myself. I had been wrong, blind, and finally, painfully awake. November 18, 1944. The war was ending for me long before the world admitted it. I walked through the ruined outskirts of Berlin that morning, boots sinking into ash and broken stone. Above me, the sky stretched clear and pale, as if trying to forget the months of fire and thunder that had torn it open. But I remembered every contrail, every shadow, every engine note that once made my stomach tighten with dread. The Mustang, the machine I had mocked, hovered in every memory like a blade of light. It had cut through our lies, our pride, our illusions of control. I used to say it took our sky. Now I understand it took something deeper, the arrogance that kept us chained to a collapsing cause. My laugh from that first day felt like a distant echo, twisted into something sharp, a scar instead of a sound. As I crossed a field littered with the skeletons of burned-out aircraft, I felt neither anger nor bitterness, only clarity. The Mustang had not humiliated me. It had revealed me, exposed the hollow confidence I had carried into every mission, and stripped away the last pieces of a world built on deception. I survived, not to boast, but to remember.